So many Halo fans watched as JerValiN pulled off what was thought to be impossible. Halo 2 Legendary, all skulls on except Envy, without dying. And he won a $20,000 bounty set up by YouTuber Moist Critical, and it was a pretty incredible arc to watch. Prior to all of this, JerValiN had been grinding away in an attempt at a challenge that may have been harder than the Moist Critical challenge. This is the challenge known as Goliath. And prior to the Moist Critical challenge, JerValiN was 6 months into the grind of this specific challenge and had still not beaten it. So why exactly is Goliath so much harder than Moist Critical's challenge? Well, for one, it's LASO where you can't shoot, so you can only imagine how difficult that is. Okay, so let's start by looking at some of the rules set up for this challenge. For Goliath, firstly, you're not allowed to shoot any weapons. You can melee, and you can also use swords, and grenades are okay. Next, it has to be on Legendary difficulty without any deaths, no save and trick quits, and no last checkpoints, and of course the biggest part, the LASO rule set, which essentially stands for Legendary All Skulls On. If you don't know what the skulls are, those are in-game modifiers that make the game much harder, and just a quick reminder, these are what the skulls do. Anger, Catch, Mythic, and Thunderstorm make it so enemies shoot faster, throw more grenades while also having more health and are often higher ranks. Blind and Assassin make it so you can't see your own HUD and all enemies are cloaked. Ghost and Whoopopotamus Skull make it so enemies don't flinch, and they also have better awareness, practically giving them like reverse Promethean vision from Halo 4. Then there's the Famine and Black Eye Skull, which make it so that when weapons are dropped, they have half of the ammo they normally have, and the only way to recharge your shields is by punching an enemy to death or anything that's programmed to have health. Then there's Old School Grunt Birthday, which make it so any headshot blows up as a plasma grenade. I Would Have Been Your Daddy Skull, which makes rare dialogue more frequent. The Sputnik Skull, which displaces gravity on objects. And the Envy Skull, which gives Master Chief invisibility for 6 seconds at a time, the same way the Arbiter's invisibility works. So let's go ahead and take a look at why this run is so difficult and obviously much more challenging than the Moist Critical Halo 2 LASO challenge. Now, the idea for this entire challenge actually started well over a year and a half ago when JerValiN was doing his original LASO Deathless, the one with the Envy Skull, and after he completed that, he started doing a 0-shot legendary run. Now, if you haven't actually watched a JerValiN stream, you might not fully understand the total extent of this, but JerValiN's community and chat is definitely interesting. There's obviously a lot of banter, back and forth, and jokes, and a meme that kept coming up was JerValiN needing to complete both of the challenges together at the same time. JerValiN was like, no, that's dumb, but there was still demand for it, so eventually, as a meme, JerValiN set up an astronomically high $3,000 donation goal where he said he would attempt it for 60 days if they ended up somehow raising that. He definitely was not expecting that to ever actually get raised, but then as a big middle finger to JerValiN, his community raised him $3,000. Then JerValiN, once starting the challenge itself, said that he would continue to try the challenge until he beat it, as of course the challenge is hell, if they raised another $2,000, which once again his community, wanting to make JerValiN suffer, raised $2,000 and another middle finger, where at that point JerValiN had to vow that he would continue to regularly make attempts on the Goliath run until one day he could actually beat it. While JerValiN did take a couple of breaks here and there throughout the time of him attempting Goliath runs, in total he was working away at this challenge for about 6 whole months before the Moist Critical challenge started, and there was a mad race to be the first person to pull that challenge off. As we all know, JerValiN was able to just cruise through the Moist Critical challenge without any struggle or challenge whatsoever.
And of course, the f***ing Needler! Dude, the Needler! Dude! Getting off.
But in all honesty, after how challenging the Moist Critical challenge truly was, a lot of the community that had regained a lot of interest over Halo 2 challenge runs had now joined the ranks of JerValiN's fan base, and we're looking forward to seeing what run could possibly be harder than potentially the Moist Critical challenge. And this is where we can look at JerValiN's attempts at Goliath. Now, we did talk with JerValiN to get a little bit of insight as to what some of the biggest points of contention are in a Goliath run, and we'll do the best we can to explain this, but make sure if you're not already subscribed to JerValiN on YouTube or following him on Twitch, do yourself the favor, because just the chaos that happens in these runs are incredible to watch.
No, 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 no. No. Stop. No. No. Stop it. Okay, that's it. You had enough opportunities. Out.
Matter of fact, there were 2 heartbreaking occasions where JerValiN made it all the way to the final boss fight on the Great Journey just to have something weird happen and his run fall apart.
I just got shot by a brute shot. Oh my god! No way! No way!
Starting off on Cairo Station, as per usual with the Goliath run, there is a lot of tedious and specific strategies that someone has to do if they're going to try to progress through this level. Fortunately, with the Envy Skull now being back in the LASO lineup here the way that it should be, since JerValiN can't shoot, he does have to be really reliant on things like timing of his very short burst of invisibility, making sure to land grenade throws and sticks, and things can get really messy in this level, especially in the bomb room at the end. There's a ton of elites in this room, and not being able to shoot makes this whole part so much more challenging, but essentially JerValiN has to bait each elite one at a time and in a way kind of kite them around towards the back section of the room, while also triggering the elite to become aggroed and switch to his sword. And then he has to jump on this ledge so the elite will turn around and start walking away, which makes the elite vulnerable to a quick back smack. Individually, one elite at a time isn't that difficult, but when you have to consistently do it for every single elite to clear through this room, it becomes a very long, tedious, and dangerous process. If one thing messes up, you're back at the beginning. There's also extra problems that can arise with the elites if they are the dual wielding ones, as they have this weird sword draw animation cancel that happens, which can allow them to just instantly pull their sword and just wreck you. So there has to be extra caution there. Fortunately enough, if there is a run that gets past Cairo Station, the next level, Outskirts, isn't too bad. It's pretty basic, straightforward, as the rooftops navigation lets you skip a large portion of the level. There's a few moments that can be scary when you're going through Hotel Zanzibar, but otherwise you can utilize a vehicle to maneuver your way through the level and play it as safe as you can, popping invisibility when you can, because even when you're in a vehicle, the invisibility still applies and enemies won't see you momentarily. So Outskirts works out okay, at least most of the time. Metropolis is a little bit of a different story. This was a huge level of contention for JerValiN in his earliest days of the run. Essentially, it's pretty horrible early on, and JerValiN would have to utilize a warthog driving through a tunnel, hoping for the best that he wouldn't die, but later on started to theory craft a new strategy that allowed him to maneuver through the tunnel, hitting certain head glitching spots, which make it so that the enemies don't fully see where the player is and just can't instantly headshot him or whatever, which did give JerValiN a little bit of a safety net to at least find a more consistent path to clearing out the tunnel. And while in some runs like LASO, players prefer to get on the Scarab early or take out the Scarab how you normally would, in this case JerValiN plays it very slow, letting the Scarab finish its entire walking path, and slow plays the Scarab at the end, manipulating the AI a bit to make this whole section a little bit more manageable and also mitigate the risk. Okay, Arbiter is really interesting here because the AI for the heretic elites are actually quite a bit different than the AI that are used on the elites earlier on say Cairo Station. To put it in the simplest terms, the heretic elites on Arbiter are a little bit easier to manipulate if you use your camo and run at them, and then if you can close the gap, they're pretty easy to kill if they try to melee you. It might seem like a challenging thing if you're playing LASO and having to deal with all of these heretic elites, but if you know when to time your camo just right, it does become survivable even if you can't shoot. And while Arbiter is a little bit easier than maybe you would expect, Oracle on the other hand is an incredibly hard level. There's just a lot that goes on this level that makes this level a major potential run killer. There's this really challenging ghosting displacement that you have to do, and it's not like the same type of ghosting we would see done on Cairo Station on LASO, where if JerValiN doesn't hit the box correctly 100 times, he can just start over and try it again. If you mess up on the ghosting on Oracle in this specific run, you're dead. Your run ends right there and you're back to Armory. Then once you progress through the level further, you have to hit the same same ghosting again on your exit, which means essentially you have to get this ghosting trick down perfectly 2 times in a row to have your best chances at surviving this level and managing while also avoiding the enemies that you really don't want to have to fight with. Then to top it all off, since this is classic Halo 2, there isn't invincibility that you can just use on this level, meaning the boss fight itself is actually incredibly challenging. And mind you, at this point, you only will have 4 grenades going into the boss fight. JerValiN pointed something out that I never actually even knew about, but when you're looking at the different heretic leaders and you're trying to figure out which one's the real one is the one that's breathing on the respirator and you can see the breath coming out of it. They've made that such a huge context clue in the cutscenes before, and it literally never even crossed my mind as an indicator until it was pointed out. But essentially, JerValiN has to make sure that he moves quickly here and lands the stick perfectly before the heretic leader jumps back into the tubes. And mind you, he's also playing on OG Classic Halo 2, which does have a little bit of a different configuration when it comes to using the analog sticks, and it just makes precision aiming on Classic Halo 2 a little bit more challenging. So when you're on a really tight time squeeze and you're trying to perfectly pull off a grenade throw, it does add a little bit extra of a challenge than what we can use with the more modern control schemes that had been added to MCC. Okay, so next we were going on to Delta Halo, and this level isn't too bad at the beginning. There is some really interesting things that are done here utilizing the main structure. He essentially does this really interesting lineup into the skybox. Mind you, with the blind skull, there's no indicators on the screen for how to do this lineup, and at this point JerValiN just memorized what is supposed to be on the 4 corners of his screen to do this lineup, and it's actually really impressive. Otherwise, the rest of this level isn't too much of a threat, much like the main LASO. As long as you don't randomly fall through the map, you're probably okay. Once we get to Regret, things start to really get more challenging. First of all, there are a ton of elites that are in this room early on. Essentially, 2 elites typically spawn here, but the way that the game is programmed is if you kill the elites too quickly, 2 more will spawn in. So a player like JerValiN has to be ready to kill all 4 elites right away, because if he only lets the 2 spawn in and wait, they'll run off and make it way harder to kill. This part can already be really frustrating, but by far the worst part of this level is this major choke point at the first gondola button press. Now, a lot can go wrong here, but the path that JerValiN ended up creating to survive this is really interesting.
Jump into that little block on the top of that gondola and then do a sword fly off of a turret, camo mid-flight, and do a sword fly mid-air stop to get past those enemies.
And mind you, while all this is going on, the blind skull also makes it so you can't even see what weapon you have out, which does add a little bit extra confusion here. Now, the underwater section of this level isn't too bad, but the second underwater gondola does have a little bit of a hectic section. Essentially, this elite makes things just way harder than they have to be. For whatever reason, this specific elite is just kind of the worst. JerValiN has like this really crazy specific camo timing that he does to try to maneuver around the elite, which is the option he goes for, which does get him ahead to the next part of the level, which isn't the worst. There's a lot of head glitching to avoid getting killed, and of course the big double grenade jump to get into the boss fight room, moving all the furniture around to block doors like he's in an IKEA during a zombie apocalypse. And then once he triggers the actual boss fight, he has to go for a grenade board, which essentially, when he is in the process of lining up the hijack on Regret, he times a sticky grenade perfectly, because with the mythic skull, for whatever reason, it makes it harder or maybe even close to impossible to kill Regret without doing some sort of special hijack with either a sticky grenade or a sword. But there is a chance of the run falling apart, because if you mistime your sticky grenade board, you could risk the possibility of the sticky grenade bouncing off of Regret's shield and sticking the Master Chief instead, also killing the run. Okay, next is Sacred Icon. This level is just tricky already, but it is extra awful because of the pistons. Like, on easier difficulty, difficulties, you just press a button and the pistons go for it. But on Legendary and LASO, you have to technically shoot the pistons for them to open up. But without shooting, you have to just use the sword, and it's just dumb and awkward to actually get it to work. And it gets really annoying when you're in sections where there are a lot of flood and you're just trying to move along. Now, this level does have a handful of usual tricks we would see in a run like this, like little skips here and there, head glitches, and grenade jumps. But yeah, those pistons are definitely a pain in the ass. This is actually a level that JerValiN cites as being one of the big levels that a lot of runs would die on just because of all of these variables that would happen. Quarantine Zone, not that bad of a level, surprisingly. There is this slant slide out of bounds that every time I've talked to JerValiN in discussing whatever run he's working on, he always brings this specific part up because it is a scary section where you feel like you're about to fall off the map and lose your entire run. He also told me he's never fallen off before, but it is a terrifying part of the level. Okay, Gravemind. Yes, this level is awful. Yes, it is one of the hardest levels in Halo 2. And essentially, we see a lot of similar strategies to what JerValiN has done in other LASO runs being used here, but also some big adjusted strategies as well. Fortunately, the invisibility does help a lot, and there are a lot of sections of head glitching that he utilizes, but the big effort that is done here is to skip some of the enemies and really pick which battles he's going to try to take on after he gets out of the opening area. Fortunately, the new prison skip trick that is more reliable is a massive save here, making the whole run a little bit better, but the back half of this level is incredibly more challenging with the rule set for Goliath than what he faced with the critical challenge. Now, JerValiN does a little bit of math when playing through the back half of this level, where essentially he calculates which enemies he's going to kill and which ones he's going to skip, and then will retroactively go back to load certain enemies to manipulate the total amount of enemies that can load in the level at a time. By using this strategy, it at the very least leads him to the path of lesser resistance when getting to the final section of the level where this bridge is, and so on. This is one of the big parts where it really shows that all in all, when Bungie was developing Halo 2 LASO, they always intended for players to have invisibility when playing as the Master Chief. And the invisibility plays a massive role in being able to just have even a fighting chance in some of these scenarios. Still, nonetheless, Gravemind has this reputation of being just a completely brutal level, and it holds up here watching JerValiN's playthroughs on Gravemind. This is definitely not a level that anyone can just breeze through, and fortunately enough though, JerValiN had been practicing this level so much in the Moist Critical run that when he got to it in the Goliath run, he was already very familiar with the little nuanced functions of enemies and their placements, so that going into this, he really had the full awareness of the situation and strategies to maneuver through all of the parts of the level. Uprising, surprisingly not that bad of a level. Things are pretty smooth in this level. Fortunately enough, JerValiN is able to use a super bounce or two to get outside of the map and get to the end of the level without having to fight anything. Then we get to High Charity. Now, we do remember from the critical challenge, High Charity can make or break everything because the trick is incredibly scary to do. And this time around, using the setup without having a gun you can shoot does make things a little bit more tricky. And while JerValiN was doing a great run here, he had made it all the way to High Charity just for this to happen.
It went right through him. Game's trash. Oh my god, I'm dead. The clutch, chat.
JerValiN somehow managed to survive this, as crazy as that was. Seriously, this run could have just been another dead run, just like the two that he had on the Great Journey, except this time he didn't even get to see the Great Journey. Fortunately enough, after that, he's able to do the butterfly and make his way to the end of the level, flying on the flood, meaning that after all of this, there was just one final level left, the Great Journey. Now, if you remember from the critical challenge, the Great Journey is a very interesting level level when you're playing LASO because of the black eye completely messing up the functionality of this level, the way that the loading works. Essentially, the black eye skull makes it so that your health only recharges if you melee kill an enemy. However, the black eye recharging your health doesn't trigger the same way that you naturally would trigger yourself recharging health if the black eye skull was not enabled. And right before the scarab cutscene, the game runs a trigger check to see if the player is in a safe place, as in they're not jumping, they're not being shot at, there's no enemies just randomly shooting in the sky, and of course that the health is recharged. However, even if your health is charged, but it did go all the way down and was depleted at some point, because the black eye skull is the only way to regain your health, the game still won't register the black eye skull and it thinks that you're in trouble, which means this cutscene won't ever actually start and essentially your game can soft lock, which adds this whole extra challenge to the first half of this last level, because not only is the level hard enough, you have to maneuver all this with the lasso set and not shooting, but now you can't take enough damage to take your shields all the way down or your game is over. Now this time around, it seemed like JerValiN not only wanted to pay a little homage to Bungie in a fun way, but also definitely did not want to die on the last level, last boss fight of the great journey for this challenge after making it this far multiple times before. So he decided this time he was going to utilize the Sergeant Johnson trick, which is where you can not only bring a Spectre with you into the final boss fight, but you can also use Sergeant Johnson as a passenger and duplicate Sergeant Johnson. But JerValiN opted, instead of just duplicating Sergeant Johnson, into duplicating Sergeant Johnson 6 more times, and giving him an army of 7 Sergeant Johnsons to help him fight against Tartarus. Now, there was this very, very close encounter with a brute during this final boss fight, where this brute just survived a backsmack.
I'm actually really low health. I'm not gonna be bothered with that.
Honestly, it's a miracle that JerValiN didn't just get killed here, but in the back of his mind, when he went for the backsmack, he knew there was a slight, slim possibility that this brute would just say nah and just not die to the backsmack. So he was prepared for the outcome and managed to just slip out alive and then just backed off. And fortunately enough, the Johnsons distract the brutes and Tartarus. They can chip away at Tartarus's health as well, which meant that after all of this, JerValiN once again managed to pull off another challenge that players thought was absolutely impossible. And it only was a few days pretty much after he had managed to beat the Moist Critical Challenge. And now, besides the fact that his audience had raised $5,000 for him to even attempt this challenge and then go for it until one day he could beat it, but another user in his chat by the name Gearhead offered a $500 bounty if JerValiN could one day actually pull this off, and the guy actually lived up to his word and sent a $500 donation after JerValiN managed to win the entire thing. So after all of that, what's next? Well, one thing JerValiN has talked about always wanting to do is a LASO co-op Deathless run. And for a while, he had been running through the game with his friend Josh, who sometimes doesn't know his lefts from his rights, but is a really good Halo player. But co-op LASO Deathless isn't something that they're just going to be able to beat. Okay, actually, they beat it just like a couple days after Goliath. I mean, they had some heartbreaking moments along the way, but in the grand scheme of challenges, they did a pretty good job and actually just crushed this one. Don't get me wrong, Josh is a decent player.
You'll give Josh $100 if he does the drive-by stream. Oh, dude, that's an easy one.
And no matter how chaotic things get, these guys definitely work really well together.
Dude, please get up here.
Oh, I'm dead.
How?
Because they chased me, you fucking I couldn't just jump up there. There was nothing I could do. Why couldn't you just wait at the start? All you had to do was stand behind the wall. You just run out and get us rocketed.
Restart the mission.
God, you suck!
But this is just another example showing how knowledgeable JerValiN really is when it comes to Halo 2 LASO. But even then, JerValiN's not quite finished with Halo 2 yet. There's some other challenges that he's thought of theoretically that could be possible that no one's even attempted or tried out before. Now, at the time of recording this, if it hasn't been beaten already, JerValiN's been thinking about throwing his hat back into the Moist Critical Challenge, as the race to be the first person to complete Halo 2 LASO without envy is getting really close for the Master Chief Collection. JerValiN did one attempt and he made it all the way to the end of Gravemind already, so it's gonna be any day now between Fraser.
Please, don't be weird. Oh my god.
JerValiN.
I'm dead. Yep. I got blasted by the fuel rod guy.
Zoo. Or Thesis X.
No, why? Why?
Who are about to claim the title of the second person to ever beat LASO, Deathless, Envyless, and the first person to do it on MCC. This one's gonna be a really close race because while JerValiN's already made it past Gravemind, these other three runners have all made it to at least Uprising or further. But yeah, even if JerValiN doesn't just swoop up and take this after pretty much 3 weeks of him just doing all these other challenges and doing other Halo 2 things, it is fun to see JerValiN come and do this other challenge that, while he doesn't really need to be the first person to do it on MCC to prove anything since he already was the first person to do it on regular Halo 2, whenever he does complete it, whether he's first or not, it is going to show that ultimately he was able to just do it on any version of Halo 2. You know, except Halo 2 Vista, which we have a $20 bounty out on that nobody's even attempted yet. At the end of the day, there's no denying that JerValiN is an amazing Halo 2 player, incredibly knowledgeable, but also able to execute a lot of really incredible things in order without dying, and that's something you don't get to see too often in video games. Hey, and if you watched this far into the video, thank you for all of your support. Thank you for sitting through our ads or using YouTube Premium. There's two of us who work on these videos, and we try to keep them interesting and concise at the same time, even if they're these long 5-hour type runs that we're trying to condense into a shorter video. We want to give a huge thank you to our patrons who literally have just surprised us at supporting our channel since launching our Patreon. So thank you once again to all of them. And hey, if you want to help support us, you can check out our Patreon. You can throw just a couple of dollars our way, and you're not only paying for yourself, you're also paying it forward if you use AdBlock. So if you're the type of person who uses AdBlock, that's okay, but you could continue to use AdBlock and just feel a little less guilty about it by signing up for our Patreon. And once again, if just one person signs up for our Patreon, it's pretty much paying for other people to also have this guilt-free AdBlock. So you kind of pay it forward. I don't know, we're trying to come up with creative ways to incentivize our Patreon side of things. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. Make sure you're subscribed if you're new with notifications on so you don't miss new content. We'll see you all soon with a new video.